Yeah, so I guess let's just continue what we were talking about off mic about you studying psychology.
Yeah,
Um,
okay.
yeah, where's your interest in that come from?
I think I've always been interested in psychology. I think it kind of interacts with all different aspects of life and society, culture. Just it's interwoven with everything. And being interested in the paranormal from quite a young age, obviously, a lot of the sort of explanations for things that people think are paranormal have a basis in psychology. So the way that we process information, the way that we perceive information, um, plays a huge role in why people interpret things to be paranormal. And when I first became involved in paranormal research, sort of back when I was a teenager, I did so from much more of a position as a believer. And then as I started to realize there were alternative explanations for what I was experiencing, what other people were reporting, my interest in psychology grew a lot. And the more that I learned about the ways that we can be fooled and the way that we can fool ourselves, my interest just grew and grew till I sort of just before I was 30, just before I turned 30, I decided, I'd never had a university education. I'd gone straight into work after my GCSEs, and then I kind of had a it's either now or never moment, and so enrolled with the Open University.
Oh, wow, amazing.
Yeah.
Do they uh, do the lecturers on the Open University still have really bad jumpers? Because that's what I remember from the broadcast as a kid.
So it's mainly online now, and we have you can do in person stuff, but obviously not this past year and a bit. Um, but it's mainly online, and so there are pre-recorded things. I've never really noticed the jumpers, to be honest.
You will
I've
now.
usually just like have my head down, scribbling notes away before they stop talking. Um, we do online tutorials as well, but you don't see people. So it's just a little icon. Um, and they don't do so. They used to be like on the BBC, didn't it? I think
Yeah,
overnight at the
yeah.
BBC would do the Open Uni stuff. So the OU still collaborates a lot with the BBC, so they do a lot of co-productions, but it's now just all online. So you can they say that studying part-time with the OU will take about 16 hours a week. So you just have your textbooks. Well, I do on mine. It varies from different modules and different pathways, but on mine, I just have textbooks that you have to read a part of every week. And then you have online stuff as well that kind of you do after you've read the textbook or in conjunction with reading the textbook. And that's where a lot of the videos and documentary stuff sort of comes in, is on the online stuff.
There's a couple of things I want to clarify. One of them is that when I say terrible jumpers, I actually mean awesome jumpers.
Right, okay. Sort of
And
retro, old school.
yeah, totally, just like colours that this decade hasn't seen before, or tones of colours. Uh, and also, I think it's such an amazing thing. Although my memories of those broadcasts on the BBC are mainly of frustration that my cartoons haven't started yet.
Yeah, I only sort of remember them from being sort of when I was a kid being sick on the sofa at night, and nothing else was on. So you were just in it watching some random documentary. I can't imagine. I imagine it must have been quite tricky to be an OU student back then, because I guess you would have had to record them, or you would have had to be up at like 2 in the morning watching this OU lecture. So I can't
Yeah,
imagine how they managed it. Like,
no, totally.
yeah.
Anyway, listen, let's get to the chase. Um, Tell me. Well, I guess let's start at the beginning. I love your Twitter feed because I'm fascinated by the paranormal. I think that I'm in a less informed way, uh, like more of your way of thinking. I've had, what I think would constitute like a fairly good, inverted commas, paranormal experience. And even from the moment it happened, I thought, well, this is amazing because this is a scary story, but at the same time, I am completely aware of how complicated my brain is, and that
Yeah.
is probably a much more likely explanation than this having happened being a ghost.
Right.
But before all of that, what was it that got you interested in the first place?
I can't really pinpoint it to one thing. I get asked this a lot, and I've thought a lot about this. We grew up in a council house in a remote village in Wiltshire, a village called Hilperton. And we for as far as I can remember, the house was just haunted. I don't remember it being like suddenly we think now that the house is haunted. It was always just that there was something there. And as a kid, I always felt that it was a woman, so the ghost of a woman who didn't approve of children being in the house, because we were quite boisterous. My brother's 4 years younger than me, and we were always fighting and scrapping and running around, being noisy. And sometimes I have sort of memories of running in from the back garden through the kitchen and then getting into the hallway and just stopping because I felt like I was going to get told off, even though my mum wouldn't tell me off. But it was just like there was a presence in the house. So I think I was always aware of the idea of ghosts, though my mum used to believe in ghosts, and she never really promoted it to us. She would try and shield us from it because obviously it would scare us, and it would cause all sorts of problems at bedtime. I don't want to go to bed, to keep the light on. I can hear something outside my room. And when I was really, really young, sort of, first class at primary school, 5, 6, at night time, I wouldn't go to the bathroom on my own. I would go to my parents' room and then get them to escort me to the bathroom because I was so scared of this thing in our house. And I know my brother felt the same way. They're probably not. Yeah, they really didn't. It was in fact, actually, my mum was so sort of annoyed by it that she wrote a letter. She forged a letter, I suppose you could say, from the fairy queen, because I also used to believe in fairies. And it was this letter from the fairy queen that basically said, to all ghosts and ghouls and bad guys and monsters, you are not to come into this bedroom when the children are sleeping. And she put it on the door, and that did the trick. It stopped us from like being terrified, for a little bit anyway. So I grew up sort of being aware of ghosts, and then I think I went from.
Can I just interject quickly? What were the happenings that were going on that made you think your house was haunted?
I think it was mainly just a sense that there was somebody there. There were noises, kind of like footsteps. Now I look back and I think it was probably just our heartbeat sort of in our ears. And sometimes when you really listen, you will hear things that just are normal, floorboard settling and that kind of thing. But when you're an imaginative kid, you kind of just make up things as well, that you convince yourself that things have happened when they really haven't. And we used to have this thing happen with the electrics in the house. The light bulbs in the landing would just fall out, and you would kind of walk into the hallway below, and there would just be broken glass everywhere. But it never really made sense where the glass fell. So you would expect it to be on the stairs because that was directly beneath the kind of the light fitting, but it was always in the main part of the hallway. And I remember my dad and my mum being really baffled about how this glass had gotten to that part of the hallway. And sometimes, I remember getting our first dial-up computer. So we had a family computer in the dining room, and where you sat, your back was to the dining room, and there was a serving hatch in the wall between the dining room and the kitchen. And sometimes you'd be sat there, and then you would have this overwhelming sense that you were being watched, and you would sort of turn and look at the serving hatch. There would be nobody there. And then I remember once it got so overwhelming, and I was so convinced. I was sort of a teenager at this point. I was so convinced that something had walked through the house and was now watching me through the serving hatch that I was too scared to go out of the house the traditional way, and I climbed through the window and ran to a friend's house. I was that terrified. And I think it's very much mind over matter in those instances, but when it's sort of every day it sort of builds up into this kind of haunting scenario, I guess. And once you are convinced that you're haunted, then just like everyday mundane things, you'll suddenly chalk up to being paranormal. So you wouldn't normally think twice about it, but because you think you've got a ghost, you're like, oh my god, that must be the ghost. So I think that had a huge role there for us as well.
Let's jump back into the chronology, because I cut you off. Sorry about that.
That's all right. No, it's fine. It's fine.
You were talking about after your mum does the sort of bit of a switcheroo with the letter, kind of what happens then?
Yeah, so that was when we were younger, and that stopped us sort of getting out of bed and being too scared to go to bed, because I do remember like bedtime just being an absolute ordeal and just being terrified in my room. So she wrote the letter, and then it made it feel like we were safe, I guess. And then as the years went on, I then became a teenager, and I became less frightened and more interested in the paranormal. And around probably about the age of 14 or 15, my mum told me that she had seen a ghost in the kitchen. And I remember this encounter. I didn't see the ghost myself, but I had woken her up in the night to say that I wanted a drink, because again, I was too scared to go to the kitchen on my own. So I woke my mum up and was like, I want a drink. So she led the way down into the hallway, into the kitchen. And I remember very vividly her being ahead of me as she opened the kitchen door, and then she shut it, and she was like wedged between the door and the wall. And I was like, I want a drink. She's like, hang on a minute. And I remember that happening, but not really thinking much of it. And then she told me that when she had opened the kitchen door, there was a woman stood in the kitchen looking through the serving hatch. I was right. And when my mum opened the door, this woman just very slowly turned around and sort of just walked through the back door and out of the house. And my mum had sort of wedged herself between the wall and the door so that I wouldn't see. And then just never told anybody about it. Now, I don't have an explanation for that. Obviously, I didn't see it. I don't think my mum was lying, but that intrigued me massively, and I wanted to know what was going on when these things happen to people, and why they happened and who they happened to. And I got massively interested in the paranormal, specifically ghosts, but the paranormal in general. And as I mentioned, we'd sort of had our first dial-up computer, so I had access to the internet, and it wasn't just library books now. I could go on websites and forums and chat rooms and talk to people about the paranormal. And sort of through doing that, I got to learn about the television show Most Haunted, which was hosted, or is hosted, I should say, by Yvette Fielding, because it is still going. And the rest, as they say, was history, because that basically told me and showed me that people are not just interested in the paranormal, but they actually go out to the places that are said to be haunted looking for the ghosts. And that was it. I was hooked.
I should say at this point that I interviewed Yvette Fielding a couple of years ago.
Okay.
And, I thought she was brilliant company. She I also know someone who works on the production team of Most Haunted. I think I'm okay to say this because I can't even remember who it was who told me. So I'm not sure anyone can trace it back anyway. But they were talking about the sort of behind the scenes war between Yvette and her husband and Akora, Derek Akora.
Right.
And
yes.
how this was like this was almost sort of like a Liam and Noel kind of situation, you know, they completely got each other's backs up. But the thing when I met Yvette Fielding is, I said to her, I said, you don't really believe this stuff, do you? I don't think I said it like that, to be honest, because I'm too respectful of sort of people's beliefs. But I think I said something like, well, this is showbiz, right? And she swore blind that this was that those experiences were authentic. But then I guess she would, you know, she was talking to a journalist.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, I never really know what to make. I never, that there are things that have happened on that show where there's no question that it's been faked, or not necessarily faked, but staged maybe, or played up. And there's a book by Will Storr called Will Storr versus the Supernatural, I think it is called. And there's a piece in there where he went along to one of the live recordings, because they used to do these Most Haunted live streams basically on television before live streaming was even really a thing online.
Yeah.
You would be watching it as it happened, which is very Ghost Watch, but that's a whole other discussion. And he was present at one of these, and he's got this chapter in his book where he discusses this and how he gets to witness what happened when the cameras weren't on them. And it just it kind of lifts the lid on I don't want to say it's all fake because I can't prove that, and I don't want to libel anybody or slander anybody, but I have my suspicions. I'll say that. And it's television at the end of the day. And I know that a lot of people who were involved in sort of ghost hunting movements and groups and paranormal research, a lot of them will get quite angry about Most Haunted because they'll say it's sort of giving the whole movement a bad name. But Most Haunted isn't real life ghost research. It's a ghost hunting television show. It's there to entertain. And when you take away the idea that it's representing paranormal research in the real world, it's actually quite fun to watch. If you kind of suspend that disbelief, watching people pretend to be dragged around, or maybe pretend to be dragged around on the floor and attacked and taken over by ghosts and like talking as though they're the ghost, it's actually quite funny.
Totally. I think there was it's weird, like I've been meaning to write something about this for years because I love professional wrestling and I can't see any difference between the two things really. I think that where it becomes a moral quandary is, not to speak ill of the dead. And if he wasn't a fraud, then he can probably hear every word that I'm saying right now. But there was a thing with Derek Acora when he started airing opinions on Madeleine McCann, for example, and I remember thinking this is, and also there was, I can't remember who it was, but there was like a show that was on whatever network it was that Most Haunted aired on, that was almost like a live spiritualist.
Originally was on Living TV, I think, ironically. Show about the dead on Living TV.
This was sort of like Kilroy but with mediums, and
yes,
I find things like that really kind of disgraceful, really, to be honest.
But that's almost like it's kind of like a televised version of what happens at spiritualist churches, though I know that people who are spiritualists would say no, that's nothing to do with us. And I know that the spiritualist church sort of denounced people like Derek Acora. Oddly, they never sort of turned their back on Colin Fry, who was also a psychic medium, was also almost haunted sometimes, because he did do the spiritualist churches too. But yeah, I know the shows you have like a big audience of people and the psychics sort of reading people in the audience. It's very sort of, it's almost like something which should be very private is suddenly very Jeremy Kyle, just without the fights.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Okay, so I'm going on tangents all over the place here, but go back to when you become interested in this as a teenager, because I guess that like how, when I was a teenager, I woke up one day and, got into, I don't know, did the Duke of Edinburgh scheme, like how do you kind of decide, oh, I'm going to be into paranormal investigation?
Well, it sort of happened around 2005, which I think is about when the whole Derek Acora thing happened on Most Haunted, where he channeled the spirit of a man called Creed Kafer, which is a fake character, and that name's actually an anagram for Derek Faker. And there was also another one with a character called Rick Edels, which is an anagram of Derek Lies. That sort of thing sort of made the papers at that point. And I'd watched those shows, and I realized that maybe relying on television shows for good information isn't the way to go when it comes to, big matters of life and death and what happens when you die and all that. Maybe I shouldn't trust the TV people. And so there was a local forum at the time called Weird Wiltshire. It doesn't exist anymore. And I remember putting a post on there saying, hi, we're forming. I'd had like this discussion with my mum because she was the one who had the major interest in the paranormal. And I was like, we should just go and do this for ourselves. Clearly, it's possible. The people are doing it. They're doing it on television. People are doing it in real life. Why can't we do that? So we put this post on this forum saying we're thinking of starting a paranormal research organization based here in Bradford-on-Avon, which is where I live at the moment. And is there anybody interested? We're going to meet at this local pub on this day. Come along. And so we go to the pub on the day, and there are people there, and we formed a group. Didn't really know what we were doing, and it's funny because our whole point was we're not going to do what they do on the television shows. But then we just literally did what they do on the television shows. We just copied it completely because we hadn't done any research other than watching television shows. And so we formed this group, and it was called, and remember, I was 18 at the time. That's why it was so cringy, but it was called Have You Got Spooks, which the anagram was Hugs, Hugs. And I was really proud of that at the time. We did actually rebrand, and we became 12-hour paranormal. And then we did another rebrand, and we were Wiltshire Phenomena Research, which sounds much more respectable.
Yeah, you get there in the end, I think. But yeah. I would like to say well done, 18-year-old Hayley.
A paranormal team called Hugs. It's good, isn't it? Right?
Yeah, totally.
Yeah, I really liked it. But then I got like overruled, and then we need to change the name. We're not going to be taken seriously.
I can see that
as though we were being taken seriously. No one was taking us seriously anyway, you know. Right. So that happened in about 2005, and we went ghost hunting for a good 2.5 years or so. And then I started realizing that the things we were doing didn't really make sense. And there were people like Professor Chris French, Professor Richard Wiseman, Dr. Kieran O'Keefe, and so on, who were saying things in the media about alternative explanations. And when I considered those and looked at what we were doing and what we were experiencing, I was thinking, oh my gosh, could that be what's going on here? I learned, for example, the pareidolia effect was a big thing that blew my mind when I realized that the way in which, you know, we see faces in clouds can also cause us to see ghosts in photographs. And I was suddenly struck that, oh my God, we've been fooling ourselves this entire time, and we've wasted so much time, and we've wasted a lot of other people's time. And so we sort of, the way that I then conducted investigations changed, and I stopped the team from being able to use spiritualist techniques. We stopped using pseudoscientific equipment, and we stopped turning the lights off. And that resulted in a mass exodus from the team, and to the point that it was me, my mum, and a family friend left in our team, because everybody else wanted to do those things. And so they went and they formed their own team and carried on doing the ghost hunting stuff. Right. But that's sort of when I had my kind of big light bulb moment and completely changed our approach. And when we took away the objective methodologies that we had been using, suddenly things were not happening. And that, to me, it just proved to me that those alternative explanations were definitely what was causing all of the phenomena. Well, actually, I say all of the phenomena. There are still things I cannot explain, some really weird things. But the majority of the stuff that we were experiencing and chalking up as evidence of the paranormal, it just became really clear that we had sort of tricked ourselves into thinking that.
So interesting. I think just throwing my own stuff here, I feel like I talk about this almost every episode, but the experience that really sticks in my mind was that I had constantly been, I had a friend, they were a couple, and they had talked about their house being haunted for many years. I had never had obviously my ears pricked up because, you know, I love all that stuff. I'd never had an experience there, and then one day I was there, and it was fairly late at night. I was watching the television. One of my friends said, "Would you like a cup of tea?" They went in the kitchen. A minute later, I felt a hand on my shoulder, and turned around and my friend wasn't there, I kind of turned around and went, "Oh, that was quick," and they were in the kitchen, and it couldn't have been them that touched my shoulder. My caveat to that is that I have OCD. I do a podcast about OCD as well, called the OCD Chronicles. I'm saying that for the benefit of other people rather than you, Hayley. And 5 years before that, as an example of just how complicated that conditioning can be, I believed that God was trying to communicate with me via the security light in my backyard. Right. So with that comes a sense of, which obviously God wasn't doing that. So with that comes a sense of my brain isn't always the best thing to trust. So I have thought over the years, well, was it suggestion, or ultimately, I guess where I was coming from before when I was saying, I think I'm of your belief, but probably not as informed. I think that I come away with it and go, something's going on there, which could be explained more conclusively with science and the unknown science than this is a dead person trying to contact me.
Yeah, it's interesting because I've had a similar experience actually, where somebody sort of tugged on my elbow, like the sleeve of my shirt that I was wearing, and I thought it was a friend, and I turned and they were like 12, 15 feet away. And I was like, what? And they were like, what? And that happens a lot. People have the sort of taps and pokes, and they think it's somebody you would expect to be tapping on the shoulder, and it's nobody there. The thing that the line I always take is that we have these experiences which we cannot explain, but that doesn't mean it's unexplainable. It just means we can't explain it. And I know that I frustrate a lot of other paranormal researchers who take a more scientific approach, because I don't always go straight. I don't always try and find an explanation if it's not obvious to me. I'll do research to see if I can work it out, but I'm also just happy to say I can't explain that. I also annoy my ghost hunting friends because they would then say, I can't explain that, therefore it's probably the ghost. Whereas I'm just happy to go, I can't explain it, don't know what it was, somebody else might know, we'll see what comes up in the future, maybe an explanation will present itself. And I think it's okay just to say that something is unexplained. And it's also okay to say, I've had an unexplained experience and it was quite scary actually, and it's shaking me up a little bit, because actually a lot of people aren't happy to talk about their paranormal experiences. I think it's more acceptable now. People do open up about it, but a lot of people don't want to because they're worried that people are going to think they're insane, or that, and that's just not the case. I've met so many people who've had strange experiences that they can't find an explanation for, some of which I can't find an explanation for. And they're like, please don't think that there's something wrong with me. And it's like, well, I don't automatically think that, because, there is seeing things or experiencing things like that, being touched on the shoulder is not automatically a sign that there's something happening with you. These things happen to everybody. It could be environmental, it could have been your clothing settling on your shoulder, it could be somebody hoaxing you. And those are the questions you have to ask, rather than is there something wrong with me? It's what could it have been? But it's okay if you can't find an explanation. I think people run themselves ragged a little bit trying to explain things, but actually it's okay to not know sometimes.
Absolutely. I mean, that's almost it's almost sort of like an agnostic view, really, and that I can't answer that, and that's okay.
Yeah, because there are things that I've experienced. Like one of the most shocking things that I have ever experienced was when I was a teenager. I used to work in a Greggs, which was actually quite an enjoyable job. And
did you get free Greggs?
No, you got 50% off when I worked there, which is why I had to recently join Slimming World, because that's a lot of cake. But our shop was in a not a supermarket, sorry, it was in a shopping centre, and the shopping centre was said to be haunted. and I knew about the haunting and everything because obviously I'm a ghost geek. And we used to have weird stuff happening in the shop. Things like there was this counter where you would make all the sandwiches in the morning, and it was like they're all handmade, but it was like an operation. People would just like, you had the people who were good at sandwich making, and they were just like machines. It was insane. And but they would regularly have their aprons untied from behind, as though somebody had pulled the strings loose whilst they were working, and things would get moved around, and people would hear their name being called. Like everybody would experience this. We had like these back doors that opened into this really dark corridor that led to a loading bay, and it would sound like there was a little kid stood out in this corridor calling your name. It was the creepiest thing, and the shop used to get quite hot, so we would open those doors to let cold air in, but it was too scary, so we would close them again because it honestly sounded like something out of The Shining. Like, come play with us. Just awful, really. But the most shocking thing that happened in that shop was I was serving a customer once. It was just me behind the counter, the customer in the shop floor, and then everybody else was sort of making sandwiches or pasties or whatever. And we used to have these security gates at either end of the counters where we displayed all the cakes and the sandwiches, and where we worked behind these counters, and you had to lift them up to open them, so it was so the public couldn't get in very easily. And I'm serving this customer, and suddenly the security gate at one end of the counter just slams against the wall, just completely on its own, just opens and slams against the wall. And then just near that gate is where the bread was displayed on the wall on these shelves, and it all, like half of the bread on the bottom shelf just slid onto the floor. Like every single loaf on that bottom shelf just slid onto the floor. And I remember just standing there with this person's like cake or whatever they were having in my hand and a pair of tongs, and just looking at this bread. And then I looked at the customer, and the customer looked at me and said, "I think you've got a ghost." It was the most shocking thing I've ever seen, because this gate just slammed open on its own. It wasn't just me that saw it, it was also this customer. And then my colleagues heard it and came to see what the noise had been. And I still don't have an explanation for that. And I don't think I ever will, because unfortunately the shop's no longer there, so I can't go and investigate it. But yeah, so that things like that keep me open-minded. I don't think ghosts exist. But I investigate ghosts, which confuses a lot of people and annoys a lot of people too. But that's fine. But things like that, and being like my shirt being tugged, hearing what I once heard my name called whilst I was alone in a toilet block, things like that just make me wonder, could there be something going on that we're not aware of? It could be psychological. There's something to be learned there maybe, but that just keeps me intrigued and open-minded enough to keep going, basically.
I'm super interested in the community of ghost hunters. I did some work with, I'm really interested in cryptids, and
Yes.
I did some work with some people who were involved with the hunt for British Bigfoot.
Okay.
And I found, I mean, I don't believe in, I mean, I don't know. I think there is. My gut tells me that there are species that we don't know about. I don't think Bigfoot's hanging out in Norfolk, for example. But
yeah, the Lake District.
Yeah, totally. But what I actually found more interesting than anything was meeting people from that community. Because I guess as a journalist, I'm interested in people, and someone who's interested in psychology. Interested in kind of why people do and think and act the way they do. What is the ghost hunting community like?
It's a mixed bag. It really is. So I'm also interested in cryptozoology. I absolutely love the Loch Ness Monster, and more recently there was said to be a lake monster in the Lake District, and I went up there and researched it. Cryptozoology is really lovely, and people who are involved in cryptozoology I have found to be just a really lovely, eclectic, strange bunch of people who just like to talk about strange things. I've made a lot of friends from sort of cryptozoology. There's an organisation in the UK called the Centre for Fortean Zoology, and just a lovely bunch of people. Ghost hunting, again, there are some really lovely people involved. There are a few organizations who sort of do things a bit more academically or studiously. So you've got the Society for Psychical Research, the SPR, who are, I believe, the oldest organization in the UK to sort of officially research sort of paranormal and supernatural claims. And then you've got the for Scientific Study of Anomalous Phenomena, so ASSAP, or ASAP as they're known. They are a more recently established organization who do sort of academic training and scientific training of people who want to go and hunt ghosts. But it's a mixed bag. You'll get people who have, you know, very defined goals. They want to go and find ghosts, and anybody who sort of gets in their way or says, actually, I don't think what you're doing is correct or is scientific, then woe betide that person. But then, you know, as someone who doesn't believe in ghosts but who researches them, you would think that I would just butt heads all the time. But there are so many people in the communities who are open to that. They realize that people come at it from different aspects, you know. But a lot of people have beliefs. They're out there to sort of confirm those beliefs, even if they don't realize that's what they're doing, perhaps. And I think it could be really easy as someone who doesn't believe to accidentally make it your aim to just confront those people and constantly debunk their claims and the evidence that they present to people as, you know, proof of ghosts and so on. But actually, that's really not conductive. It's not a good use of your time. It's actually better to try and form sort of a cohesive relationship with people who come at it from maybe different approaches, but may have sort of very similar goals in trying to get to the bottom of what's going on. And one thing that I always find quite inspiring is when people who are belief led will be the ones who uncover the hoaxes or find the rational explanations, which, you know, so although someone has got a belief or a belief led methodology, it doesn't always mean that they're going to be wrong or barking at the wrong trees. Sometimes they're the ones who find the solutions that everyone's looking for a case.
I mean, I think I'm not. I have a real interest in theology. I'm not religious. I sort of hate this phrase. I'm not religious, but, you know, I'm spiritual. I really hate that phrase, but I've just said it. Yeah. But what I can't stand is people like I can't stand the approach of people like Richard Dawkins, for example, who will be like, "You're silly for believing in this stuff," because I just think that's rude. I think that
it's hugely arrogant. It's really arrogant. It doesn't achieve anything other than maybe making him feel good for a little bit, and smart and superior. But actually, there's something I once wrote on my blog where I said that, you know, you shouldn't, like, your non-belief shouldn't be all that defines you. That's just a part of who you are. And actually what defines you is what you believe in. And for example, I'm atheist, but that just tells you what I don't believe in. I also identify as a humanist to a point, and that's, you know, I believe in the values of critical inquiry and science. I think the human race can progress and achieve great things if they work together, and, you know, social justice and equality, things like that. Those are the things that I believe in, which I think define me as a person more than the fact that I don't believe in a God. You know, that doesn't tell you very much. Whereas some people do get caught up in their non-belief being the only thing or the main thing that defines them. So, I mean, for a long time, I was sort of involved in the skeptic movement. I would speak at their conferences.
I was going to come to this.
Yeah, I mean, I was involved in that for a long, long time. And I look back and, you know, there is a lot of good that has been achieved by grassroots skepticism and the skeptic movement. But ultimately, I think it's a toxic movement. And there are many issues, many issues that I don't think can be solved or will be solved. And as someone who researches the paranormal, I actually found that being a skeptic, and I'm using air quotes there, people won't be able to hear that, but using air quotes, being defined as a skeptic was like putting a barrier in my way. So every time I approached someone who had a something they thought was a paranormal experience, or they thought they were haunted, I would have to work around the skeptic barrier just to get them to talk to me, or feel that they could trust me, um, without me judging them or being like, oh my God, you're so stupid. There's no such thing as ghosts. And I actually remember, I think I was at a skeptic conference, and there was somebody talking about ghosts, or there was a panel about ghosts. And I saw on the hashtag this guy write something like, I can't believe this is happening. We know ghosts don't exist. Move on. And I just thought that was staggeringly arrogant. It just showed a real lack of insight into society, where at least half the population believe in ghosts. People who think they're haunted, it defines a large part of their identity and their existence, to the point where it could be very distressing for people. And there are cases where housing associations have had to move people out of their home just to help them, kind of recover from that. It's not telling someone ghosts don't exist and they need to move on doesn't help someone understand why strange things are happening to them. And I always found that sort of attitude was such an obstacle to proper critical inquiry that in the end I just sort of left the skeptic movement and stopped being involved with it, because again, yes, I do use skepticism, but it's not all that defines me. There's so much more to being an investigator and someone who kind of takes on these cases. And ever since sort of not really being involved in it very much anymore, I found it so much more easier to kind of do what I do.
No, totally. I also think there's something, say, with the people I met who are interested in cryptids, where this was like this. These people, the people within it, that was their social circle. Like that's what they did for fun. Like it's where their friendships, even their romantic relationships, have come from in on occasion.
Yeah.
And I feel a little bit like, what right, if those people aren't hurting anyone, does an external force, what right do they have to come in and be mean about them?
I mean, I think they've always, it's okay to criticize someone's belief, but you have to understand that it's their belief, and it's not just
that's what I mean.
it's not just like a sort of abstract idea that they hold. It's something very dear to them. And so when I stopped believing in ghosts, for example, when I was sort of, I don't know, 19, 20, it was like I had to accept that I wouldn't see people that I loved who had died. So it was like almost losing them again, because you have in your mind this idea that when you die, you'll go to wherever you think you'll go to. So I thought there was an afterlife, and people that you know who have died will be there. People that you don't know, but who you're related to. So like my grandfather died 15 years before I was born. You're like, well, I'll meet him in the afterlife. But when you lose that belief, you lose that. So it's like almost like a bereavement all over again. And like you say, people form friendships through ghost hunting, through monster. I hate to say monster hunting and ghost hunting because it just sounds so childish, but you know what I mean. Through cryptozoology, ghost research, UFO research is another one. People that is a huge part of their identity, and to change your mind and to turn your back on that is to lose a part of who you are, or for it to shift and change, and you have to adapt to that. So telling someone ghosts don't exist, move on, is I've never gotten over that. I think that was like in 2010 that happened, and it still annoys me to this day that he dared to say that, really.
Yeah, no. Sometimes these things are. Why you are talking to a man with OCD who can't let anything go. Well, it's interesting to say UFOs. I'm kind of convinced that I've been convinced of this for about 5 years, but I'm sort of convinced that we're days away from knowing from some sort of official confirmation. What's your view on UFOs?
I don't think we're alone. Statistically, there's definitely got to be life out there. I mean, it has to be, right? Whether they're visiting here is a different question. I don't think we will get official disclosure. I think there are too many issues with sort of like security and, you know, military secrecy and so on for us to know. I think if the government knows anything, we're not going to find out too soon. There are certainly people who kind of spin that idea that, you know, sort of having documents released is possible. But we know, for example, in the UK here, Dr. David Clarke did a huge amount of work through Freedom of Information requests to get MOD documents released, for example, about how the MOD handles reports and sightings of UFOs. And we can see in those documents that there's probably nothing really that we can find out that will tell us what's going on, you know, if there really are UFOs coming, if alien spaceships coming to Earth. Maybe. I mean, we had the videos in America, didn't we, taking on those fighter jets where they have these like things zipping through the air and they're going, what the hell is that? Things do get seen. People do see stuff, they photograph it, they catch it on camera. Even people who are trained observers see things in the sky that they can't explain. That's one thing, but whether that's alien spacecraft is it's a different conversation, I think. And I'm not convinced that they're alien spacecraft, but you know, there are definitely things that are seen in the sky which we can't explain. I mean, I live stone's throw from Warminster here in Wiltshire, and sort of in the 60s, Warminster had a UFO flap, and things were seen in the sky. It was called the Warminster Thing, and it's still culturally very significant. You know, there are books on it. There was a conference not very long ago about the Warminster Thing, actually, that took place in Warminster. That's where I did my first ever public talk back when I was 21. And I think it would always be a thing. And I think there will always be a desire for there to be some sort of mystery around these lights in the sky. But disclosure wise, I'm not going to hold my breath on that, to be fair.
Right. Okay. Well, I think that, almost coming back to the humanitarian perspective, I think it would be a great thing for humanity.
I do as well. I would hate, though, for there to be life out there in the universe, and it comes to this planet, and someone like President Trump, like Donald Trump, is president. I think that would not be a great thing for humanity, because I think it would be a very bad first impression.
Yeah.
I think it's Hitchhiker's Guide, where they don't come to Earth because we're not ready or we're insignificant. Part of me does wonder if they just look at us and think, wow, let's just not go there, you know. But then that also does make the assumption that if there is life out there, it's sentient and is able to build machines that can come here, or would want to come here. So those, again, other questions that sort of need to be answered. And I think we can't really know the answers to those, can we, without actually meeting an alien? I'd love it to be like E.T. or Close Encounters of the Third Kind, which is, you know, one of my favorite films. That the ending of that film is just spectacular, and like the awe on people's faces as these craft come in and then they see the beings. It's such a feel-good film. An ending to, you know, that film is really feel good. And yeah, it would be wonderful to know we're not alone. But I think actually there's some crossover there with the whole idea of ghosts. I think people believe in ghosts, and I think people believe that we're being visited by aliens, and people believe there are beasts in the woods, in the forest, because for there not to be, it means this is all there is. And for some people, that's not enough. For me, that's fine. I kind of identify sort of tongue-in-cheek as an optimistic nihilist, in that I don't think there's any meaning to life, and isn't that great? But for some people, the idea there is nothing else, there is not something out there watching us or coming to observe us from close but afar, that there isn't something at the bottom of their garden that's actually like a gnome living in their trees, or that, you know, their dead aunt isn't still around. That's actually quite terrifying for them. And I think that's just part of the human condition.
No, absolutely. I mean, again, just putting a OCD perspective on it, because it's like a filter that I see so many things in my life through.
Yeah.
When I first had my, what I would describe as my first serious debilitating incident, a lot of it was about, a lot of it was hung up on a fear of death, and in tandem with that became, you know, I got interested in ghosts, like I think a lot of people my age, because of Ghostbusters,
Yeah.
because of the Osborne Book of Ghosts,
Yes.
a classic. I can see
Yes.
you. I can
Mine's
see you
somewhere
your
here.
bookshelf.
Yeah, it's somewhere here.
And Ghostwatch, they were sort of like the sort of the trifecta. But where I think it became slightly more sinister is the wrong word, but not as healthy, was when I became consumed with the thought of oblivion, of nothingness. And I feel like there is actually, I feel you're right, like that that fear is part of the human condition, but I also feel like there are positive, almost like treatments for that. You know, I feel like
Yeah.
striving for love or family or looking for meaning in our lives that isn't like God given or that isn't spiritual, I think actually
Yes.
is useful. But I think that actually when that an interest in the paranormal comes from, I want there to be more. There's bias there from the start, isn't there?
There is, I think, and that's something you have to consider when, so for example, if someone approaches me and says something weird's going on, can you come and investigate? You have to consider all of those things before you even decide whether you're going to go in, because as someone, you know, I'm not going to go in and tell someone they've got a ghost. That's not my aim. If I, you know, if there was evidence that I thought there is a ghost here, then I would tell them, but that's never happened. So you have to consider whether it's appropriate in the first place to even go and investigate at all, because you could do harm rather than actually any good. But yes, I think what you said about making meaning and finding meaning, that is really important. And I think one of the issues that we have here in the West is that we've got like a whole generation or generations even of people who are kind of gripped by death anxiety because we're not prepared properly for death, and we're so detached from it, the reality of it, and you know, even how the dead are dealt with and handled is so clinical and so detached that I don't think it's, to a point, I don't think it's healthy. You know, there are people who won't, I understand people don't want to go to the chapel of rest, it is horrible, but there are people who are terrified by the idea of seeing a dead body, and there are people will go their whole lives without seeing a dead body, and that's strange really, in a way, when you think about it, how removed we are from that reality. And there are cultures where it's normal to go and visit your dead. Some people keep their dead at home until the burial. There are cultures where they bring the dead back out of their tombs and dress them for ceremonies, and where they keep the dead at home. And it's normal to, I think there's a book by Caitlin Doherty, and I've forgotten the name of it, which is really bugging me, but it's basically where she goes for the hunt of the good death, and like she explores different cultural approaches to death and how people deal with death. And there are people who sleep with the dead in their, not sexually, but you know, they'll have their grandfather will be in a bed and they'll sleep in the same room, and it's absolutely normal for their culture. But here in the West, we would find that horrifying. You would arrest somebody for doing that, you know, or you would think they would need to be arrested. And when I know when my mum passed away in 2017, the whole funeral process and having to organize it and having to deal with the death certificate and everything really opened my mind up to how we're never taught any of this stuff. We're never prepared for it, and you don't talk to people about it. So Mum passed away completely unexpectedly, and we had no idea what she wanted to happen at her funeral because we'd never had those conversations. And it was a real eye-opener to me. And I kind of took that kind of revelation that I had about how ill prepared we were. And then I thought, well, maybe this is why people think that their loved ones are still with them, because they're not ready. They've never been prepared. And that sudden loss is too much. And it just made so much sense to me. It just gave me a whole new perspective, really, on why people might believe, and also just how ill prepared we are here in the West for death and dying and the realities of it. We're just so detached from it.
Hayley, I feel a little bit like I could talk to you for, well, at least another 12 hours. But I know that we both have lives. So if we
I don't know about that.
No, you have a fascinating life.
Oh, thank you.
Why don't we press pause on it and then maybe revisit this somewhere down the line?
Okay, sure.
Brilliant. Thanks loads for your time. If people want to investigate, no pun intended, your work, where should they head?
So I have a website which is called hayleysaghost.co.uk. That's HAYLEY is a ghost. I'm on Twitter at Hayley Stevens. And I think pretty much if you type Hayley and ghost into Google, everything just comes up. It's pretty intense, really.
Brilliant. Okay, well, I'll speak to you soon, Hayley.
Chat soon. Thank you.
Take care.